Most people think economics is complicated because they were introduced to it through the wrong door. They were shown graphs before human behavior. They were shown jargon before incentives. They were shown politics before arithmetic. And once you do that, the whole subject starts sounding like a cloudy room full of experts arguing over words ordinary people are not supposed to understand. I have never believed economics was mysterious in that way. The economy is not a machine that needs a priesthood to interpret it. It is people, it is choices, it is scarcity, it is trade-offs, it is incentives. It is the same basic human drama repeated across millions of transactions until it becomes large enough to be called a system. If you do not understand that, you will keep getting fooled. You will get fooled by politicians. You will get fooled by headlines. You will get fooled by salesmen. You will get fooled by your own emotions. And perhaps worst of all, you will keep mistaking good intentions for good results. That is one of the most expensive misunderstandings in public life. I have spent my life allocating capital, studying businesses, watching markets, watching management teams, watching governments, watching consumers, and watching the very old human habit of trying to repeal arithmetic through sentiment. It never works. The crowd always wants a softer answer than reality allows. They want a world where wanting something hard enough changes what it costs. They want a world where prices can be overruled because the price hurts someone's feelings. They want a world where value can be commanded into existence by legislation. They want a world where everyone gets paid according to moral poetry, instead of according to the value they actually create. They want a world where trade has winners and losers like a schoolyard fight, instead of mutual gains like an honest exchange. In short, they want a world where economics behaves like a campaign speech. It does not. The economy does not care what sounds compassionate in a sentence. It responds to incentives, trade-offs, prices, and feedback. That is why understanding basic economics is one of the most practical forms of self-defense a person can have. It will not make you rich by itself, but it will make you much harder to fool. And the world is full of people eager to profit from your confusion. So let me tell you what I think matters, not in the language of a classroom, in the language of a life. The first lesson is that people respond to rewards, not intentions. That sounds obvious until you realize how many policies. Businesses, marriages, workplaces, and personal habits are built as though the opposite were true. A long time ago, the state of Maryland wanted more money. That is not unusual. Governments often want more money the way teenagers want longer curfews. They always think the problem is that someone else is not giving enough. So Maryland looked around and said, very well, let us tax rich people more heavily. The state had around 8,000 millionaires. The arithmetic on paper looked elegant. Raise the tax rates on high earners, collect more revenue, and call it fairness. Everyone applauded. Then the real economy answered. The next year, people counted again and found that roughly 2,000 millionaires had vanished from the state, not vanished into smoke. They moved, they changed behavior, they changed residence, they changed where income was recognized, they changed what Maryland had unintentionally rewarded them to do. The state did not receive the clean windfall it had advertised. It lost far more revenue than its celebratory calculations had promised. That is not because millionaires are saints or villains. It is because they are people. And people change behavior when incentives change. This is the first brutal truth most adults never fully accept. Intentions do not drive behavior nearly as reliably as incentives do. A government can intend to help the poor and still design a policy that rewards capital flight, business relocation, reduced investment, and fewer jobs. A company can intend to create teamwork and still reward internal politics more than real output, in which case it should not be surprised when the place fills up with smiling saboteurs. A husband can intend to improve his marriage, but if what he actually rewards is silence, avoidance, and emotional withdrawal, then that is what he will get more of. That is why I always prefer asking a colder question, not what do I want people to do. What am I actually rewarding them to do? This applies in the boardroom. It applies in a household. It applies in your own personal behavior. If you reward yourself every time you feel stressed by ordering useless things online, do not act surprised when stress and packages start arriving together like a married couple. If you reward employees for looking busy instead of producing value, do not complain that you built a theater company instead of a business. If you reward politicians for sounding compassionate instead of delivering workable results, do not complain when the speeches improve and the streets do not, people move toward what pays. That is the rule. The second lesson is that every choice has a cost. This is one of the simplest truths in economics and one of the least respected. People think cost means the cash they handed over. It often means the thing they can no longer have because they chose something else. If you have $10 and want a coffee, a burger, and a movie ticket, you cannot have all three. You may get one and part of another. You may change the quality of the choice. You may delay something, but whatever you do, one thing chosen is another thing surrendered. That is economics. Not because life is cruel, because resources are finite, time is finite, attention is finite, money is finite, energy is finite. That is why I have always disliked the question, can I afford this, when it is asked in a lazy way. What people usually mean is, do I possess enough cash or enough credit to complete the purchase? That is a much weaker question than the one that matters. What am I giving up to get this? I knew a man who bought a BMW for about $50,000 because he thought he had made it. Nice leather. Good badge. Pleasant feeling at stoplights. The world would see him differently, or so he imagined. Now, let us compare that with a $20,000 Toyota Corolla and pretend the difference, $30,000, went into a broad, low-cost index fund rather than into vanity over 10 years. That difference might roughly double depending on the path of returns. Over 30 years, it could become $250,000 or more. That means the BMW did not cost $50,000. It cost $50,000 plus the compounding that 50 would have enjoyed if it had not been converted into identity. The same thing is true everywhere. A giant house does not just cost the mortgage, it costs the capital not invested, the weekends not free, the taxes, the insurance, the repairs, and the opportunities denied by becoming the servant of the property. A long, pointless meeting does not merely cost an hour. It costs the work that hour could have finished, the thinking it could have allowed, the energy it could have preserved. Once you really understand trade-offs, the world becomes both more terrifying and more manageable. Terrifying because you begin seeing how expensive casual choices can be. Manageable because you stop living as though every purchase or hour stands alone. The third lesson is that prices are messages. People hate hearing this because prices are often unpleasant. A high price feels like an enemy. It feels accusatory. It feels unfair. But price is usually not the enemy. Price is often the only honest signal in the room. There is a famous exchange I have always liked. Mikhail Gorbachev once visited Britain and asked Margaret Thatcher some version of how the country made sure people got fed. She answered, "Prices do." That is one of the most elegant sentences in economics. Think about what it means. London has not grown enough food to feed itself in well over a century. Millions of people eat there every day. No Ministry of Sandwiches coordinates the bread. No central bureau decides how much Norwegian fish should arrive, how much Brazilian coffee, how much Argentine beef, how many tomatoes, how much flour, how many eggs, and yet the shelves keep getting stocked, not by one grand plan, by prices. When something becomes scarce, price rises and sends a signal: use less, bring more, find substitutes, expand supply if you can, reallocate from where it matters less to where it matters more. When something is abundant, price falls and sends another signal. There is enough, slow down, consume more if valuable, redirect effort elsewhere if needed. You could not coordinate this manually even if you wanted to. Imagine being put in charge of all the pizza in a country. Not one pizza shop, all the pizza. Your job is to determine how many pizzas each city wants, what toppings are preferred on what days, how much milk becomes cheese instead of ice cream, how many tomatoes become sauce instead of ketchup, how many ovens must be built, how much flour gets diverted from bread, how delivery routes change in rain, how student demand changes during school holidays, how a football game changes orders on a Friday night. No person can know all that. No committee can know all that. No central office can gather the changing preferences, the local scarcities, the weather, the moods, the substitutes, the hidden inventories, the small incentives, and the countless marginal adjustments happening every minute. But prices can, not because prices are magical, because prices compress scattered information into one usable signal. This is why I always tell people that when you see a price that angers you, pause before you moralize, ask what the price is trying to tell you. Is something scarce? Are too many people chasing too little supply? Did production costs rise? Did demand surge faster than anyone expected? A price is not always pleasant. It is still information. The fourth lesson follows directly from that. Price controls do not work. Now, this is one of those statements that sounds harsh until you understand what the alternative has repeatedly produced. Take New York City. For years, one could find thousands of abandoned apartments sitting empty while homeless people slept on the streets outside. That sounds insane until you understand the mechanism. Imagine your school announces free pizza tomorrow, unlimited. Take as much as you want at first, the regular lunch crowd lines up, then word spreads. Kids who brought lunch show up anyway. Kids from other grades appear. Some take extra slices because free things make people nervous about future availability. 20 minutes later, the pizza is gone. The early arrivals hoarded, the late arrivals got nothing. That is what happens when the price is forced down below where the market would have balanced supply and demand. The demand surges because the price says take more. Supply weakens because the producer earns less. Everyone blames greed. Arithmetic keeps doing its job. Rent control follows the same structure. Rent rises. Politicians respond by capping what landlords can charge. The public cheers. Then more people want apartments because the rent is artificially low. More people stay in apartments larger or longer than they otherwise would because the deal is too good to surrender. Maintenance falls because landlords cannot recover enough to justify proper upkeep. New construction weakens because investors do not like building things whose price has been politically handcuffed. Older buildings rot, some owners walk away. Then you get the absurdity of empty or decaying units in a city where people desperately need housing. That is not a bug in rent control. That is what rent control does. The same pattern appears in food. Zimbabwe once imposed price controls during an inflationary crisis to keep food cheap. The result was not a feast for the poor. Shelves emptied. Farmers stopped bringing goods to market because selling at the controlled price meant losing money. Food existed. It just stopped showing up where people needed it. Then there is the reverse error. Price floors. India guaranteed a high price for wheat in the early 2000s to protect farmers. The incentive became obvious. Grow more wheat, no matter what. Farmers produced too much. Government warehouses filled with millions of tons. Grain rotted while other people still lacked food elsewhere. Price too low, and you get shortage. Price too high, and you get surplus. Either way, if you command the signal instead of listening to it, you break the system that signal was coordinating. And here is the especially cruel part. Price controls are usually sold as protections for the poor. In practice, when shortages appear, the rich find workarounds. They know somebody, they can wait longer. They can pay under the table, they can leave the market and buy elsewhere. The poor suffer first because they have the fewest escape valves. That is how so much politics works. A policy designed in the name of compassion creates a shortage that harms the exact people it claimed to protect. The fifth lesson is that profits and losses are directions. People hear profit and immediately think greed. They hear loss and immediately think failure. Both reactions are childish. Profit and loss are information. Imagine a school lunch table again. You notice fruit snacks are popular, so you bring extra packs and trade them for things you want. It works. That profit tells you something. Keep doing this. The value you created is wanted. Now imagine you try the same thing with raisins. Nobody wants them. You cannot give them away. That loss also tells you something. Stop. Move your allowance and effort somewhere else. That is what profits and losses do in an economy. They are signals about where resources are being used well and where they are being wasted. A business earning profits is not automatically virtuous, but it is receiving a powerful message from the market. Something about what it is doing at that price and quality and scale is worth preserving or expanding. A business suffering chronic losses is not automatically immoral, but it is also receiving a message, the labor, capital, materials, and management attention being poured into this enterprise are not producing something valued enough to justify their cost. That matters because resources are finite. If a bad business dies, that is not always a tragedy. Sometimes it is exactly how an economy cleans itself. The engineers go somewhere more useful. The steel gets used in something people actually want. The capital is freed from a weak idea. Then governments and romantics step in and break the signal. They say the company is too important, too symbolic, too politically connected, or too emotionally resonant to fail, so they subsidize it. Now the economy is doing the equivalent of paying the raisin boy to keep buying raisins forever. The losses are no longer allowed to tell the truth. Resources remain trapped in weak uses because someone could not bear the embarrassment of admitting the market was right. This happens in whole industries. It happens in education systems. It happens in public agencies. It happens in family businesses kept alive by denial. A person should look at his own life the same way. What activities are producing results? What habits are producing health, money, or peace? What projects are just bleeding cash, time, and morale? A loss is not always shame. Often it is information. Use it. The sixth lesson is that your wage is a price too. This is where a lot of sentimental nonsense enters public conversation. People ask why nurses are not millionaires, why construction workers work so hard for moderate pay, why some physically easier jobs pay more than brutal labor, why one software engineer can earn more than 10 strong men with tools. The answer is not that the world is always fair. The answer is that wages, like prices, are tied to value creation. Suppose you run a lemonade stand and hire your friend Maria. With Maria helping, you sell 10 extra cups at $1 each. She created $10 of extra revenue. You can pay her up to $10 and not lose money. Now imagine you hire Jake instead. Jake is distracted, slow, on his phone, spills half the pitcher, and only helps you sell 2 extra cups. If you pay him $10, you are losing 8 every hour. That is what wages are at their core. Not a medal for effort, a market estimate of how much value your labor adds at the margin. Now the world complicates that with regulation, bargaining power, scarcity of skills, credential barriers, cultural prestige, and all the rest, but the center still holds. If you want to earn more, create more value, learn skills that are scarce, solve more expensive problems, make yourself useful in ways that are hard to replace. Politicians love promising living wages through legislation alone. But if a worker adds only $10 of value and you force an employer to pay $15, the employer has only a handful of choices. Raise prices if possible, cut hours, not hire the worker, replace the worker with automation. Close the shop. You may dislike that. Disliking it does not repeal it. The same law operates in your personal life too. Your employer is not paying you for your suffering. He is paying for what you allow him to achieve through your labor. That should not discourage you. It should focus you. Do not ask first, how do I get paid more? Ask, how do I become the sort of person whose contribution is worth more? That is a much better question. The seventh lesson is that trade makes everyone richer. This may be the most politically abused truth in economics because it is so easy to turn trade into a tribal story. You have a sandwich. Your friend has pizza. You both prefer half of the other's food to half of your own, so you trade. Nobody created more food in the transaction, yet both of you are better off. That is what trade does. It increases value by moving things toward higher valued uses. Adults forget this because they have been trained to think like spectators at a football game. One side wins, one side loses. Who beat whom? Trade is not usually like that. If one country buys from another, it is because the buyer prefers the goods to the money and the seller prefers the money to the goods. Both sides gain or the exchange does not happen. People say we are losing to another country as if trade were an invasion. That language is emotionally effective and economically confused. Even comparative advantage, one of the most beautiful ideas in economics, gets buried because it sounds technical when it is really simple. Imagine you are a lawyer earning $300 an hour. You are also decent at cleaning your office, should you clean it yourself. Number hires someone at $20 an hour. Even if you are better than the cleaner, your advantage at law is far larger than your advantage at cleaning. You gain by specializing and trading. Countries work the same way. One nation may be better at making both cars and shirts, but if it is much better at cars than at shirts, and another nation is relatively less bad at shirts, then both countries gain when the first leans toward cars and the second toward shirts, and they trade. That is why economists with wildly different political values have, for centuries, generally understood that trade is cooperation, not war. Of course, trade can create transitions, pain, dislocation, and political difficulty. I do not deny that. What I deny is the childish fantasy that an economy becomes richer by trying to make everything itself regardless of cost and opportunity. Trade at every level is a way of saying, I will stop wasting time on my weakness and focus on my strength. That is true between nations. It is true between businesses. It is true in your own life. If you are spending hours every week on tasks you hate, perform poorly, and could outsource cheaply while neglecting the thing only you can do well, then you are violating the logic of trade inside your own schedule. You are keeping your life poorer than it needs to be. Now, if you step back from all 7 lessons, you begin seeing the shape of economics more clearly. People respond to incentives, not intentions. Every choice excludes another. Prices are messages. Price controls silence those messages and create chaos. Profits and losses are directions. Wages are prices for value. Trade enriches both sides by moving effort where it is most productive. This is not just theory. This is the operating system of real life. Once you understand that, 1,000 public arguments become much easier to evaluate. You stop asking whether something sounds compassionate. You ask what it rewards. You stop asking whether a purchase feels affordable. You ask what it crowds out. You stop blaming prices for being unpleasant and start asking what reality they are signaling. You stop treating losses as shame and start treating them as feedback. You stop demanding higher pay from the universe and start asking what scarce value you can offer it. You stop thinking of trade as surrender and start thinking of specialization as liberation. This is why understanding economics matters so much. It will not make you omniscient. It will not let you forecast every market move or every election or every recession, but it will make you harder to manipulate. It will make you less sentimental in the face of arithmetic. It will make you less likely to clap for policies that sound beautiful and work terribly. And perhaps most importantly, it will make you more disciplined in your own life. Because economics is not really a story about nations first. It is a story about choices, your choices, what you reward, what you buy, what you delay, what you outsource, what you keep doing despite repeated losses, what you refuse to do even though it would create value. That is where the subject becomes personal. That is where all the theory becomes useful. I have always preferred ideas that survive contact with life. These 7 do. They survive markets, politics, family budgets, marriages, wages, businesses, and entire civilizations. Ignore them. And you can still sound clever for a while. Respect them. And you will stop making certain expensive mistakes. That alone puts you far ahead of the crowd. And that, in my experience, is often all the edge a rational person really needs.